Hey everyone, welcome back to Keto and Crime and Thought Crime. Today we continue our expose into Satanism by delving into the more modern trajectory of Satanism. So let's get right into it. When we last ended, I had just kind of taken you through a very brief history of the character known as Satan, the figure known as Satan, and we tied into those things of his original origins in the Abrahamic religions and other religions, and then we brought forward to what we know now as Satan, and then we went into a generalized discussion of the history of Satanism, which is the belief or interest, study, worship of Satan, however you want to term that. And we kind of moved through the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, into the Age of Enlightenment, into the Salem witch trials briefly. As I said, I left a couple links to videos that explain certain things more integral. And then we moved forward into the 1960s in the United States, which you kind of saw a resurgence of the works of people like Aleister Crowley, and the whole hippie, free love movement was tied to God is dead. You had dissatisfaction with the Vietnam War, so it led to an interest in things like Wiccan, and then you had Crowley, and then you had movies that I forgot to mention, such as The Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby coming out, as well as The Omen, laid the groundwork, would later be the movie in the 70s. It came forward into literally an era in the United States history that was ripe for Satanism and for witchcraft. And here we are with the rise of one of the most well-known Satanist organizations in the country. So let's get into it. Anton LaVey was born in Chicago as Howard Stanton LaVey, April 11th, 1930. His family would move to California shortly after his birth, and that's where he grew up. He did quite well in school. He always had an interest in weird things. He loved wild animals, particularly big cats. He also was interested in the works of Aleister Crowley and magic, and even though he himself did not believe in God or really anything celestial in that regard, he did believe there was magic in life. So he did really hammer on to the works of Aleister Crowley. He dropped out of high school in California at the age of 16 and joined a circus and a carnival, and that's where he spent the majority of his formative years working a variety of jobs in carnivals. He was a roustabout, which is a general kind of cleaner of carnivals. He also, his most favorite job was as cage boy with the big cats, lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my. And he would also learn to play the calliope, the pipe organ, anything that they needed doing in the carnival, he would learn. He eventually graduated to becoming an actual lion tamer and lion trainer. And it was during this time that he continued to study the occult. In addition, he often worked the peep shows at the carnival, which were, you've heard the term 𝐓𝐿𝐴𝐻𝐿𝐴 coochie. Way down yonder on the Chattahoochee, it gets hotter than a hoochie. Peep show. Early day porn show. And don't demonetize me, Susan. But he would work these shows as a carny help him backstage and whatnot. And he would notice local men who were like the big boys in the local churches would come in and enjoy themselves on a Saturday night, and then they would go to church the next day and pray it all away and pretend it never happened. And so he learned to have a huge disdain for organized religion and the hypocrisy that he observed. I have to put this in here. There is some, discussion about whether LaVey ever actually did all these things in the circus. There was a couple of journalists that did some in-depth investigations and said they found no evidence, but I'm going to take LaVey at his word, and we're just going to go from that angle, because we do know that even after he left the carny or the circus and went back to the Bay Area of California, and including all the way down to Southern California, and started working in bars and nightclubs. He played the piano in burlesques. Allegedly, he dated Marilyn Monroe, though there is really no evidence of that. We do know that one of the things he always did was keep a big cat. He always kept big cats as pets. So Anton LaVey was an early version of the Tiger King.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm 𝐬𝐻𝐿𝐴𝑥𝐿𝑜𝑡IC.
In 1950, he married Carol Lansing, and they had one daughter, Carla LaVey, who would become one of the high priestess of the Church of Satan later on, was born in 1952. Anton LaVey, in order to avoid the draft for the Korean War, which was just getting heated up, he did attend City College of San Francisco and studied criminal justice. No evidence if he ever graduated, but he became a photographer for the San Francisco Police Department, which he did for 3 years. And he also kind of dabbled into the whole burgeoning industry of psychic investigator. I guess that was a thing in the in the 50s into the 60s, because as you said, we're now getting back into the 60s again, which had a revival of an interest in magic and the occult and witchcraft. So it all kind of fits. So he got into, psychic investigation, kind of looking at dead bodies and things like that. So he really started, in addition to keeping big cats and just already being interested in magic, it was a perfect storm for what he would go on to do. It's like other parts of his life, his work for the San Francisco Police Department has also been questioned because, again, no records, they say, could be found. But you have to remember, Anton LaVey, it was not his birth name, was not his real name. It's not uncommon to think that he might have changed his names, but I'm going with the official story here because it's the journey to the whole subject of Satanism that's important here, not just Anton LaVey. Remember that. Anton was friends with several writers in the fantasy and occult genre, including Blanche Barton, who wrote The Secret Life of a Satanist, and others that associated with a magazine known as Weird Tales. So he always fostered a love of fantasy, occult, and magic. In 1960, he and Carol divorced. He became life partners with a photographer that he met through, I'm sure, photography, named Diane Haggerty. They never got married, but they did live together for 24 years and co-founded the Church of Satan together. They had a daughter, Zena Galitea Shrek. Later, her maiden name, of course, was LaVey, in 1963. And they moved, of course, deeper into San Francisco, into the Haight-Ashbury, into the heart of hippie country. And this is where we actually get into the founding of the Church of Satan. Now, LaVey had been supporting himself for a while through writing for occult magazines, as well as doing paranormal research for people. So he had become kind of a local celebrity. And as a result, he started putting together meetings of sorts where they would talk about various subjects, read these occult books, and talk about Satanism, magic, and occult in general. And these usually happened on a Friday night. There would be a lecture, there would be, fellowship. And he decided in 1966 that he would add some ceremony to it. So he ceremoniously shaved his head, and that's where you get those famous Ming the Merciless pictures of Anton LaVey. I think the character of Ming the Merciless in the original Flash Gordon was actually based on LaVey. Can't prove it, but it looks too much of a coincidence to be a coincidence, just saying. And on April 30th, 1966, with the shaved head, he proclaimed 1966, year one, the new decade, the new millennium in the reign of Satan, and proclaimed the Church of Satan to be a thing. And so he and Diane formed the Church of Satan. They wrote all the Holy Scriptures, namely, chief among them, the Satanic Bible, which we will talk about, and basically founded what is known as the Black House in San Francisco, which is just a black house near the Haight-Ashbury that houses everything that Anton LaVey and Diane built up as the Church of Satan. They established ceremony, everything they need. But the deal is, they never believed in an actual existence of a creature or a theistic orientation known as Satan. They were 100% atheist, though believing in no deity, though they did believe in the magical and the spiritual side of life. And they kind of delved into that thing of the 60s. However, over the years, up until LaVey's death in the 90s, the church has evolved into more of a atheist organization for like-minded people with very high standards. They want people that are very successful, very driven. There's been celebrities such as Jane Mansfield and even Sammy Davis Jr. were members of this church, but they were not religious. It was just a way for very successful, very driven people to get together and have fellowship with some fun ceremonies thrown in. According to Peter H. Gilmore, their current high priest, who I've heard interviewed many times, he just says they are very theatrical atheists. Though not an atheist activist organization, they are just an activist, an organization for their people, and they're often considered, at least LaVeyan Satanists, who are the ones that occupy the current Church of Satan, and their website's still very much alive and well, atheistic, very selective. You have to pay to get in. You have to be selected. There's several levels where they teach you everything, and it's just an organization where they find comfort and love, I guess, love for among themselves. However, according to the tenets of the Church of Satan, as well as LaVey, as I said, they do not believe in a literal Satan. They believe that Satan, going all the way back to his roots as Lucifer, is a personification of the rebellious human spirit. They said they are the anti-church, the anti-Christian church, because in the Christian church, everything is about suppressing natural tendencies of man to go after what they want, to indulge in, rich food and sex and all the things that make life great, but Christians tend to hold back, thinking that in many ways those things are sinful, because that's what God commands, or at least that's what they think God commands. Whereas the Church of Satan believes that it is absolutely your right as a human to pursue those things and still try not to cause harm to others. And with that, we're going to jump on over to the Satanic Bible. I'm going to read you the 11 Satanic Commandments. Satanic Bible is broken into several books: the Book of Satan, the Book of Lucifer, a couple others. It's one of many satanic texts that LaVey wrote as a guidebook for members of the Church of Satan. But I'm going to read you a few things. First, in the prologue, there are 9 things that the Satanic Bible says Satan is. Satan represents indulgence instead of abstinence. He represents vile existence instead of spiritual pipe dreams. Now think about this in contrast with Christianity. Satan represents undefiled wisdom instead of self-deceit. He represents kindness to those that deserve it instead of love wasted on ingrates. Whereas the Christian Bible says, love everyone, turn the other cheek. Satanists say, at least LaVeyan Satanists say, love those who deserve it, hate those that don't. He represents vengeance instead of turning the other cheek. He represents responsibility to be to the responsible instead of concern for succubuses or vampires. So you be responsible to those that are also responsible to you. Don't worry about anything else. Satan represents man as just another animal, sometimes better, definitely no worse. They walk on 2 legs instead of 4, and they should not ignore their primal urges. Satan represents all so-called sins, and they all lead to physical, mental, or emotional gratification. So, hedonists, they believe in being a hedonist and getting everything you can. Carpe diem, seize the day. And you can see a lot of, they're based on a lot of philosophical works. LaVey was an avid reader, and so he took lots of different philosophies from the libertarian movement, Ayn Rand, Rose Wilder, through even some social Darwinism, survival of the fittest. So he read a lot, and he brought a lot of these elements into what he thought Satan should represent, and therefore what his organization or church should represent. Satan has been the best friend the church has ever has, and has kept him in business for years, and I don't think that needs any further explanation. The satanic rules of the earth. This would be directly in contrast with the 10 Commandments, except there are 11 of these. Do not give opinions or advice unless you ask. Do not, unless you are asked to give them. Do not tell your troubles to others unless you really think that they want to hear them. When another person's home, show them respect or do not go there. If a guest in your home annoys you, treat him cruelly and without mercy. Do not make sexual advances unless you are given the mating signal. Do not take that which does not belong to you unless it's burdened to the other person and they cry out to be relieved. So don't steal from others. Acknowledge the power of magic if you have employed it successfully to obtain your own desires. If you deny the power of magic after having called upon it with success, you will lose all that you have obtained. Now, as I said, he believed in some sort of magic, but I don't think this is to be taken as a literal, like hocus pocus kind of magic. Maybe more of a drive, a spirit, but I'm sure some take it the other way as well. Do not complain about anything to which you did not need to subject yourself. So don't get yourself into situations and complain about it. Do not harm little children. Do not kill non-human animals unless you are attacked or they're for food. And when walking in open territory, bother no one. If someone bothers you, ask him to stop. If he does not stop, destroy him. That is the 11 satanic commandments. And then, in contrast to the Christian 7 deadly sins, we have 9 satanic sins: stupidity, pretentiousness, sopialism, self-deceit, herd conformity, lack of perspective, forgetfulness of past orthodoxies, counterproductive pride, lack of aesthetics. So you can see very much in tune with the human animal and living a fulfilling hedonistic type lifestyle. Now, as I said, they are atheists. They are not active atheist activists, but they are atheists. But they do believe in some flair and some tenets that they associate with the rebellious spirit of the thing we know as Satan. And this organization caused the rise of what we know as atheistic Satanism, which will lead into this organization still around, as well as another well-known organization we will talk about. But of course, and they've even, Peter H. Gilmore, who is the high priest, has even commented on the existence of theistic Satanism, which has no connection to the Church of Satan, no connected to the Satanic Temple, which is the other organization we'll talk about. But these are spirit-off cults and other little things where they actually worship a theistic deity known to them as Satan, and where you get into the things like sacrifice, killing animals, that sort of thing. But the deal is that there is very little evidence that these types of cults exist. And this is where we're going to jump over. Church of Satan has become a target for the religious right, as you can imagine, because that was their whole point, is to, give the middle finger to religion. The fear of the Church of Satan, as well as the fear of the idea that there may be people out there worshiping a literal Satan and sacrificing animals and sacrificing children and killing virgins, as well as the personification of these things in movies in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, as well as heavy metal music and all this stuff, led to what is known in the 80s as the Satanic Panic. And it led to a lot of different atrocities. And I'm going to drop a short clip of a previous episode I did on the Satanic Panic and the McMartin preschool trial, which is huge. I'm going to link the entire video here. You need to watch that. I'm going to put the Satanic Panic part here because it fits so well.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Satanic Panic of the 1970s and 80s. Specifically, the 80s is when it ran rampant. But this thing can be traced back to a fellow comedian. Yay! First the Joker, now this guy. But it can be traced back to a person that had aspirations of being a stand-up comedian, and he did it in a most dishonest way, and started a chain reaction of persecution. In 1972, The Satan Seller was written and published on behalf of a comedian by the name of Mike Warnke. And Mike Warnke was a Christian comedian that built his comedy career off of touring churches and religious organizations around the country in a very comedic way, telling his story of overcoming drug abuse, drug dealing, and being a high priest in the Church of Satan. Yes, the very Church of Satan created by Anton LaVey in the 1960s. Now, what Mike Warnke didn't really understand, as a lot of people that perpetrate this kind of fear didn't understand, is that Anton LaVey was actually an atheist. And the Church of Satan itself poses no belief in any type of higher power, God or Satan. They're atheists that like to dress up and scare people. They were basically created to give a finger to the Catholic Church that Anton LaVey had been a member of for many years and felt it was full of hypocrisy and deceit and criminality, and he just basically wanted to give the good old middle finger to them, so he created the Church of Satan to do that. And if you've ever actually read the Satanic Bible, it's mainly about exaltating the self over everything else, taking care of yourself and your loved ones above everything else, and it actually puts forth a belief that a human can achieve anything they want to achieve within human limits, and that they should basically, it proposes kind of a Darwinian view, survival of the fittest, which can sound kind of cruel, yes, but that's what it is. So and the kind of theatrics they put on are simply that. They're theatrics. They're a lot of fun. I've actually listened to a couple of interviews with members of the Church of Satan, and it's like, they're just kind of fun while doing research for this. So Google that down below. You can find lots of information on that if you're interested. Now, there are people out there that kind of take that moniker and say that they commit crimes in the name of Satan and things like that. That usually just goes back to mental illness. I mean, I'm an atheist. I don't believe there's a God or a Satan, so to me it's just kind of rudimentary. If you're into that, definitely believe what you will, but I'm just giving you the historical background. But he said that he had been a high priest in that church, a claim that has been denied by the Church of Satan itself. But anyway, so Mike Warnke toured churches and religious organizations and did a comedic retelling of his life story and how he was saved and how he is now a changed man, and he did it in a very comedic way. He had genuine comedic talent. The guy was funny. But like a lot of very funny comedians that struggle on their local circuits for a long time, I can definitely adhere to that, wasn't really getting anywhere, so he needed a gimmick. And his gimmick was to say he was a former satanic high priest and drug dealer, and he published this book which went into very graphic detail about satanic rituals and how they infiltrate lots of different things, how a lot of crimes were committed in Satan's name, and how a lot of ritualistic abuse of children took place because of Satan and satanic practices. And as a result, that book started what we know as the Satanic Panic, which was a demonization of so much of pop culture that you couldn't walk down the street without being told Satan was going to get you. This is where you had things like the backward masking of music lyrics. Do y'all remember that, when they would actually play records backwards? And they would say that it was saying things like "Hail Satan" or God is dead or stuff like that. So, but what you don't realize when you actually play most music backwards, it just sounds like a lot of gibberish you really can't understand. But when these people would get up and say, if you listen right here, he's saying Hail Satan, well, that's in your mind now. They play it and you hear it because you're listening for it, and your brain kind of mimics what you want to hear. So you had a lot of that going on. And there were album burnings, there were book burnings, anything that could, potentially be satanic. And then you had the rumor that Dungeons and Dragons, which I played in high school, was a recruiting tool for satanic cults rather than just a very fun game for geeks that really love fantasy, which is really what it was. And that heavy metal music was a recruiting ground for Satanists. And now that it wasn't helped by the fact that there were some rock musicians that were open members of the Church of Satan, and that they did sing about their beliefs in that, the human desire is number one, and that Church of Satan's a very nihilistic, hedonistic type of thing where it's like seek pleasure because we only have one life. So they did sing about those sort of things. So I guess you could say, yes, they were talking about it, but most music, most art comes from a very, even though I don't necessarily believe in spiritual, it comes from a deep place, or a spiritual place if you're that type of person. And so you do end up talking about your deepest beliefs. So they were no different than any other artists. They just happened to have different core beliefs. So all of this was bad. And so you had album burnings, book burnings. Kids were forbidden to play certain games by the evangelical Christians, which usually tend to be the purveyors of this. And all of this culminated in 1987 with the very infamous Geraldo Rivera Satanism in America special. This garnered tens of millions, hundreds of millions of views. I remember watching it as a kid, and the things they showed were quite gruesome, but a lot of it was made up. So you started having, police actually investigate crimes as if they were satanic in nature. They started talking about the existence of satanic cults around town that were, you had things like the West Memphis 3 occurring during this time period. You had all this stuff that was blamed on Satanism that really had no connection. Really, you just had a bunch of freaks wearing black, listening to music, not much different than today, going about their merry way. And a lot of this resulted in people looking over their shoulder, Satan's going to get you. And it wasn't a very cool time to be a kid in America. I'm going to show you a clip right here from a show called Terror in the Toy Box that will absolutely blow your mind, where these guys talk about how demonic cartoons and toys are. So check this out, and then we'll get back into it.
Put me now to the evil zone. I hope I find that mist.
You've been watching a Scooby-Doo cartoon, and it's amazing to me to see what's being brought forth in a cartoon. We've seen spell books, occultic amulets, we saw a crystal ball, astral projection to the evil zone, all of this in a children's cartoon. Now, I've got a guest today. His name is Phil Phillips. He's from Texas. He has been involved in missions work in his life, and he has now felt called to study the effects of cartoons and children's toys and even TV programs upon our children today. And I'd like to introduce a young man. And Phil, God bless you, and it's good to see you today.
Pleasure being here today, Gary.
Now, Phil, I'll tell you what, 14 years ago, Scooby-Doo was a lot different than what we see today, and I could hardly recognize it. Can you tell me what's going on in this cartoon?
Yes, there's a vast movement toward the occult within the cartoon and toy industry. Most people don't realize that 80% of all cartoons deal directly with the occult, and 40% of the toys on the market have occultic influence.
So little children would actually use that to even identify more with these occultic heroes, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, I think it would be interesting if we went to another video. Here's the snake and all. I mean, this is definitely an occultic toy. And it's got an interesting little feature here. I'm going to turn it on. It can actually transform your voice from your regular voice to that of an occultic hero. Is that correct? So let's get a Skeletor type of voice. Let me turn this on here. I think I'm getting it too loud. Skeletor, the master of the universe. Does that give you kind of an example of...
Yeah, you should see the commercial they play with it.
Those guys have issues. And incidentally, the scariest part of that was the younger guy, the guy that didn't look like a 1970s serial rapist. He actually said that during a 3 or 4 day fast that God spoke to him and asked him to go into a toy store. And that's how he saw all this. Now, I don't know about you, but guys like that should be creeping around toy stores. But anyway.
Many of you remember that. And like I said, it was all capped off with the Geraldo Rivera special. And later find out that along with the McMartin preschool and many other things, it never happened. So although there's probably people out there that are sick enough to believe in a literal Satan and worship him, the evidence that it's a widespread epidemic is really not there. So it is just a satanic panic. And then with that, even with the existence of a Church of Satan, which is an atheist organization, then we move forward into the modern times. The whole mist of the Satanic Panic is still upon us, but we get into modern times where you have the atheist movement, especially since 9/11, really heating up. People starting to take issue with religions like Islam and things like that. So you have setting the stage for a struggle between religious and non-religious, the atheist movement, and the atheist movement's main objective, and that's where we talk to and get into part 3. My guest, David Silverman, has been a leader of that movement for many, many years and was actually instrumental in helping me realize that I was an atheist. They have fought the fight for separation of church and state to give everybody equal footing, but it wasn't always easy because religious organizations and nonprofits in general get a lot of breaks that other people don't. So in 2013, a man named Lucien Greaves founded the second atheistic, well-known Satanist organization that is actually considered by the IRS as of April 25th, 2019, an actual religion, the Satanic Temple. And it was founded for the distinct purpose of showing those that want to put religious, stuff in public places like schools and churches and things like that, that if you let a Christian do this over here, you got to let a Jew do it, you got to let a Buddhist do it, you got to let a Satanist do it. And they have put their Baphomet statues in several places. And so they are fighting fire with fire, so to speak. They even have, you can literally join this church, it can become your congregation, and you can claim religious exemption to things like waiting. Their main thing is like helping women that want to get abortions have to get around like religious exemptions to having to get sonograms and stuff like that. Whatever your stance is on abortion, I'm not here to debate that. I'm just saying that's what they do. And they allow people that are actually atheists to claim religious exemptions for things that religious people would normally do, such as, religious exemptions to certain events, abortion, even vaccinations. If someone, I guess, is an anti-vaxxer, they can do it, though they're definitely anti-vaxxer. But things like that, they allow atheists to take religious exemptions on behalf, and it's a huge group. It's growing every day. It's mostly in the United States, and they do have some tenets, just like the Church of Satan, and there's 7 of them. One should strive to act with compassion and empathy toward all creatures in accordance with reason. The struggle for justice is an ongoing and necessary pursuit that should prevail over laws and institutions. One's body is inviolable and subject to one's own will alone. The freedom of others should be respected, including the freedom to offend. To willfully and unjustly encroach upon the freedoms of another is to forego one's own. Belief should conform to one's best scientific understanding of the world. One should take care never to distort scientific facts to fit one's beliefs. People are fallible. If one makes a mistake, one should do one's best to rectify it and resolve any harm that has been caused. Every tenet is a guiding principle to inspire nobility, and the spirit of compassion and justice and wisdom should prevail over the written spoken words. Those are their tenets. They are much more well known than even though the Church of Satan will always be the granddaddy of atheistic Satanist organizations, I think this one's more well known because they are an activist group. They do go out and protest for separation of church and state and other things. They are not just a ceremonial type of organization for high achieving atheists like the Church of Satan. They really are a activist organization. They do not believe in a Satan. They just believe he is, like the Church of Satan said, is a symbol of the rebellion of man or mankind, not just men. Let me straight that. So they have been definitely raising a storm from the satanic activity books they've given out at schools when people gave out Bibles to the 𝗏𝐽𝐻 statues. It's definitely an ongoing struggle. And with that, I'm going to end here. I'll be back tomorrow with my interview with David Silverman, and he will be talking about how organizations like the Satanic Temple and Church of Satan affect the atheist movement and whether they help or hinder. And it's a very interesting discussion about a lot of things. And with that, I hope you enjoyed it. I'm really enjoying 𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐽. I hope you are too. And I'll be back real soon. Until next time, 𝐜𝐡𝐞𝐫𝐧.